to work or participate in the care of their families. I split my clinical time between the two illnesses, and I can tell you that if I had to choose between the two illnesses, I would rather have HIV. And it's still true today, yes. Add on to Vicky Whittemore. Vicky Whittemore serves as an ex officio member of CIFSAC and is the leader of the Trans NIH Working Group, which is tasked with supporting ME/CFS research at the NIH. I remember several years ago asking Mary Dimmock about this new person working on ME/CFS at the NIH, and being surprised when Mary said, "I think she really gets it." She certainly does. Vicky Whittemore has led us out of the darkness at the NIH. 3 years ago, pre-Vicky, ME/CFS was receiving $5 million a year in funding. This year, it's slated to receive $13 million. It certainly hasn't been easy. It took her a year to wheedle enough money out of the institutes for 3 small research centers, a process I think she may have referred to as pulling teeth. And on to Scott Simpson. Scott Simpson is a great example of what the medical system can do when it really engages with an illness and what it can't do when it won't. A 3-time medal-winning triathlete and member of the National Triathlon team, Scott lived well with HIV until August 9th, 2012, when he came down with ME. Now, on good days, he can walk for 10 minutes. In his own words, "I can accept the ME diagnosis, and I can accept the bleak prognosis, but I cannot accept the harm our healthcare system perpetuates on Canadians suffering with ME. I have experienced both ends of our healthcare spectrum, from the very best research and treatment in HIV to non-existent research funding and either no or harmful treatments with ME/CFS. Scott is an active advocate who meets regularly with Health Quality Ontario, and is a member of Health Quality Ontario's Patient, Family, and Public Advisors Council." Okay. Okay, well, we've come a long way. Just a few years ago, Canada, a grant application of the Canadian Research Project was rejected because the reviewer felt that ME/CFS was not a real disease. Now we are Canada's first international ME/CFS conference dedicated to supporting research into this very real disease, and Canada is providing funding for a Canadian research center to collaborate with the NIH research centers that just opened up in the US. 4 years ago, as I mentioned, ME/CFS was getting $5 million in funding from the NIH. Now it's getting about $13 million. We have 3 NIH-funded research centers, a large intramural study is underway, and the head of the NIH and the head of NICE have publicly called this disease serious and real. We've come a long way thanks to a variety of factors. The Institute of Medicine and Pathways to Prevention reports undoubtedly played a big role. Jim Brea's TED Talk and Unrest, the ME Action Network, Whitney Defoe's story, many positive media articles, and many advocacy attempts, both large and small, that have finally created some momentum for this disease. We have, however, only come a tiny bit of the way we need to go. ME/CFS doctors are exceedingly rare. Research funding is a fraction of what it needs to be. ME/CFS is rarely taught in medical schools, and the NIH is getting very few grant applications for ME/CFS research. My question to each of you is what's needed to take us to the next level of this disease? I want to start with Nancy and ask you a really tough question.
Okay.
On the medical front, what could we do, or what would need to happen to really boost doctors' understanding and acceptance of this disease?
So, it's all such good questions. This is a very good question. So, it's interesting about getting doctors to believe something that they didn't learn in medical school, and how do they get there, and then how do they act on it. This is my own, somewhat cynical, but I think proved to be true belief. And the example comes from fibromyalgia. So fibromyalgia, 20 years ago was a made-up illness. You all were crazy, and there's no such thing. And get out of my office, right? It's pretty much fibro. And then there were 3 clinical trials that put 3 labels on 3 drugs. And 3 pharmaceutical companies sent a fleet of pharma reps to every primary care, rheumatology, and other office in the United States of America. And now the top selling drugs in the country are these 3 drugs, and there isn't a doctor in the country that won't tell you about the central pain sensitization process and how fibromyalgia is a real disease. So basically, getting a label on the drug, because then after that, profit will drive everything. So that's what I think.
And how close are we?
How close are we to a label on a drug? So that's an interesting.
What's your drug?
Yeah, we're doing some really cool science. If anyone's here tomorrow, you'll hear more about it. But we're working, I know a lot of different fronts, but we're using basically supercomputing, Watson kind of stuff to model the complexity of this illness, all the different systems, the immunology and endocrinology and so on and so forth, and put every little bit that we can learn about it into supercomputers to model the illness, and then having the supercomputers model the treatment for us, and then putting those treatments into play. Now, another illness that we are also studying that's so much better funded than ME/CFS, we've taken that all the way through animal trials, and we've cured a bunch of mice of Gulf-4 illness, which is this other related illness. And so now we're in clinical trials, the human clinical trials. Conceptually, what we're trying to do is reboot homeostasis back to normal. So it sounded crazy, the computer could do it, and then we made a bunch of sick mice well, and so now we're working on making a bunch of veterans that have suffered for 27 years well again. So that's our big mission. But the interesting thing about that is that we have the same data set in ME/CFS. We're ready, we're there, we can do it. But the clinical trial mechanism has been eluding us because these are expensive studies, and it's hard to come up with a mechanism to get the intervention funded. So we've been basically using donations, or in one case a foundation. But at the moment we're going to start the ME/CFS clinical trial in women this year for sure, hopefully by October. And the clinical trial in men by the end of the year. And that's all in donation dollars. We're just pushing it on out. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah, it's good news.
It's great news. Vicky, what will it take to compel or prod or excite the NIH enough to pump significantly more money into this disorder? You guys have done a lot. But obviously, we all need more.
There's a lot more to do.
There's a lot more to do, yes.
Always. So, just to sort of back up a little bit, when I really got involved in ME/CFS was in 2015, and then we started revived the Trans NIH Working Group in the fall of 2016. And I have to say that everyone at NIH was skeptical that there was any good research out there. And so we started talking about what research was needed, how can we really stimulate the field, and came to the understanding that we thought that the best way forward was to fund these multidisciplinary centers that really begin to work together to understand what the cause of causes of ME/CFS is, and people were skeptical we would get any good grant applications to fund. And so I think what's going to turn this around is showing them that there is progress, there is good science going on, there are people who really want to find the answers and really help individuals with this disease. And that's what we keep pushing and keep helping the investigators to come in with more grants, to help them revise their grants, to really move the field forward, because that's what it's going to take.
You mentioned how many grants you got. How many did you get for your centers? Because that was astounding.
So we got 10 applications. And I would say that the 10 applications, we certainly had, when we had the funds, we could have funded more than 3 research centers. So it shocked many people at NIH, and I think it showed people at NIH that there is good science out there to be done and good people to do the work.
Is NIH kind of just waiting for the kind of research it wants to fund to show up? And once they kind of trust the field, do you think they'll be more liable to really pump some money into it? Do you think is that it? Or is it just a matter of slowly growing it?
Well, I think, so I'm not one to sort of sit around and wait. That's not my nature. And so we're looking at every avenue to bring new people into the field, to find new ways to fund research, thinking about how we can help to support a clinical consortium that can do clinical trials, finding ways to involve and interest new young investigators to come into the field. So we're trying to turn over every stone. It's exceedingly difficult to get dedicated funds at NIH, and part of it, as those of you from the US and maybe the Canadians know, it's really difficult when we don't have an actual budget, when we're operating on a continuing resolution, which is what we've been doing for the most part for the last 3 or 4 years. And so to really have some stable, solid funding would really be helpful. And so I think, and really the commitment to growing the pot is there, but we need the research. And so I think we're out there beating the bushes too and trying to get people to come into NIH and not just sitting and waiting.
Okay, Scott, Canada's come a long way in a brief amount of time. You have even longer way to go than the US. What do you see Canadians and others potentially doing that could take you and us to the next level of awareness, resources, and funding? How can we take what's happened in Canada and further it?
Take what's happened in Canada and further? Are you talking about the research that's going on in Canada?
The fact that you have a conference, the fact that you're now funding a research center, that there's the beginnings of a research program.
Yeah, so I would say that prior to his announcement about a week ago that there'd be new Canadian funding, part of the NIH project, and the Canadian funding works out to $280,000 a year. Now, considering we are currently at $75,000 a year, I would call that one crumb. So now we have $280,000 a year, so now we have 2 crumbs.
You feeling better?
The equitable rate of ME research funding, if it was equitably funded like MS, epilepsy, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, would be based on the prevalence of ME in Canada, which is 580,000. would be 92 million. So you can see how 280,000 is insulting. So how do we get things moving quicker, faster? We have to take the message to Prime Minister Trudeau. He is the only person in Canada who has the power to make the change. We've gone to the health minister, the previous one. I knew her before she was the health minister. We worked together on global AIDS projects. I was so naive. I thought that when she set up a meeting with her policy director, that I would go in there and I would tell her what was going on, because obviously she could not know, or she would be doing something about it. So by informing her how prevalent ME rates are in Canada, how little funding there was in Canada, I thought, oh, my job is done. I've told them what the facts are, they'll do their jobs. I was so naive. That is not how politics works.
So take it to the Prime Minister.
Absolutely.
So, in Norway, the IACFS is a smoke and mirrors kind of thing. We got no money, but we somehow get stuff done anyway. And one of the things we did was offer to put on a conference if somebody would sponsor a face-to-face meeting of the board. That way you get the whole faculty, the board is all experts. It's kind of we get together, we do it wherever you send us, we go to a conference, and we get to meet. And anyway, we did this in Norway, and the policymakers showed up at the conference, and it changed the national policy overnight. It was remarkable. So I'm just bringing up this little ray of hope. If you get the right people in the room, and there was a momentum in that room, and it went from a psychiatric disorder to a medical disorder overnight from this one conference. It was really exciting.
Do we have any questions? Way in the back.
Shout it out. So, inequitable funding in Canada, inequitable funding in the United States, we've each gotten a bit more that we can afford, but we're still a long way from what's needed. So, what's the next step?
Can you repeat the first part?
Saying it's inequitable, and what's the next step?
Right.
There's inequitable funding in Canada and inequitable funding in the United States by a lot. And both countries have received substantially more percentage-wise. But what do we actually have to do to get up to the amount that we need? Because we all know we need millions and millions of dollars.
It's so challenging. You know, smoke and mirrors. A lot of what we've learned in this illness, we've learned the people in the field are just a resilient lot of investigators. I can't tell you the environment which we've had to suffer through and to be able to stick in this field and move the needle. But anyway, we're also opportunists. So in my world, Gulf War illness was the opportunity. Here's an illness, we sent 800,000 people to a war, a very short war. We exposed them to a tremendous load of neurotoxicants in this very short window of, it was a 6-week war, but it was about an 8-month deployment. And the 800,000 people went and 300,000 came home ill and have been ill ever since. It's extraordinary. 1 in 3, a little worse than that, are as ill as anyone in this room. With an illness that started as a neurotoxin and then rearranged, scrambled the regulatory loops and ended up being a chronic neuroinflammatory disorder that looks a lot like this illness. Anyway, the funding for that is for $40 million a year between the VA and the DoD. Isn't that interesting? So 300,000 people. Now, how many people are in the United States with ME/CFS? More than a million, about 1 or 2, yeah, something like that. Anyway, so, but I'll show it tomorrow. $40 million buys a lot of science. And so in a rather short window, and also there's a tremendous focus on getting to clinical trial in the way that the program announcements are written. Everything's preclinical and moving on, preclinical and moving on. So there's, I think I did the math, there's 27 clinical trials underway right now for Gulf War illness. 27. There's been 40 some altogether, 300,000 people. And in ME/CFS, I did clinical trials at Gulf while I was sitting there today, and there were 6 open studies, and every single one was a nutraceutical. Every single one. So I was like, wow, what a difference between the two fields. I said, what a difference. The difference between these two fields is $30 million. Yeah. That's what $30 million will buy you, is a tremendous push to get to the clinical trial and get people's answers. So there's that. I think it's really very exciting. Other thing that Vicky's done with this recent center application, so a center grant is sort of the equivalent of 3 or 4 big grants wrapped into one. They call RO1s, great big grants. So to have 10 center grants applied means you got about the equivalent of 30 to 40 RO1 level studies in front of the review panel. Now the average review panel now is looking at 3 or 4, maybe 5. On a good quarter, there's 4 or 5 applications. So the difference there, and this is the second time in history of the NIH this has happened, because it happened when it was under the Office of Women's Health, where they put aside a very small amount of money, it's about $3 million, and they got 37 applications. When in fact, there's no rule that says you can't apply every single quarter, and it's the quality of the science that drives the funding. So why is it that when we think the money will be there, well, we, the scientists, will apply for it, and then on an average quarter we think, yeah, well, no, what's the chance? Don't bother. There's a very interesting psychology of we, the scientists, who are not applying in these quarterly opportunities that are out there for us, is that we think we won't get funded. But when we put a pot of money there, they have to spend it. You think, well, damn, so they're going to spend that money, I should go for it. So they have the equivalent of 40 RO1 level applications for that Center grant. And we're able to, fund 3. That's the equivalent of, 12 or so RO1s. It's pretty cool, like I did it. But I think what's really cool is that you found that many scientists to reply. They were really, really good applications and new people. I mean, how cool is that? Really, really exciting to me is how that brought new people in. And now the question is, how do you keep them? The ones who didn't get funded, how are they being encouraged to come back?
Yeah, we're working and talking to those investigators all the time and encouraging them to come back, that they, even though their whole application didn't get funded for the center, there's a nugget in there that's worth funding and worth doing. And we can't fund grants that don't come into NIH. That's the way it works. And so we're really working to get those grant applications in the door. And I guess the other thing I would say is that what I've seen from my previous work, before I joined NIH, I was working for a nonprofit organization, the Tuberous Sclerosis Alliance, which is a rare genetic disease that my nephew has, and I was the chief scientific officer there. And in the course of about 10, 12 years, we went from finding the gene to figuring out what the gene does to clinical trials. And so it just takes that, getting those findings, and then people jump in and the field moves. And so I think where we're at right now is we're still looking for that first nugget of information that we can just take off with. And so I think what will come out, I'm hopeful that what will come out of the research in the next couple of years is really an understanding of maybe not what the trigger is, but what is the response? Why do people get sick and stay sick? And what is the response that's happening in the body that we can try to understand and treat? And so I think that I'm just really hopeful that over the course of the next few years we can really find those pieces of information that we can really take off on, that will give us targets for new treatment studies, potentially targets that will help with prevention, so that we can stop people from developing ME/CFS. But I think it's just going to take the continued hard work of the scientists and modeling and working together. And one of the things, and part of the reason we're partnering with CIHR, and we're talking to other countries, Australia, UK, other countries in Europe, about collaborating, because I think it's going to take a village. It's going to take all of us working together, pooling data, pooling our minds and our knowledge and our expertise to really move this field forward. And so I think that's one of my goals, is to make this an international consortium that can really move things together. So we're just really pushing and trying to keep things moving as much as we can.
Exciting.
May I start with that?
Sure.
Thank you. So the question was, how do we ramp up funding to where it should be at its equitable base, or its equitable amount? And so the way my perspective is, and I'll sort of give a little background, I tested HIV positive in 1998. Proceeded to get quite sick, as people that are HIV positive do, that don't have access to medications. I then got access to medications. My health started to improve. I looked around at the global HIV landscape and recognized that the area of biggest need was in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's where I focused my attention. So coming from that AIDS background, and we know that what really catalyzed the movement and the influx of research funding was advocacy, taken to the streets, acting out. So what we have going on in Canada is a deep institutional bias that goes from the Prime Minister's office, the Minister's of Health's office, all the way down through the political and medical institutions, right down to the physician's office. So if we're going to really increase funding, we need to overcome that institutional bias. Now, what can catalyze that quick change like Nancy witnessed? I'm going to suggest something that sounds quite provocative, and it may sound a little offensive, but what I would like to see and what I think would catalyze and change things in Canada in one day would be if Prime Minister Trudeau had to live with ME for one day. Because I could guarantee you that very next day, that $92 million that is equitable funding, it would start to flow.
How do you do that?
We give it to him.
Give the guy a mess with his coffee.
Provocativity. Provocativity, yes. We need to make a splash, I agree. Next person?
Yeah, I'm just curious, and this may sound ignorant, and you probably can't answer even a fraction of this question, but why? Like, why is this disease not studied in med school? What is it about it? Is it because it's seen as psychosomatic or completely made up? I mean, like, what can you attribute as part of, I guess, contributing that this is just a completely overlooked, ignored disease?
You know, the weirdest reason why I think it's not studied much, beyond the fact that, you know, the evidence base is so lousy, is that we teach in medical schools by modules. There's a rheumatology module, an infectious disease module, there's cardiology module. Nobody owns this disease. Who's your specialist, you know? There's no specialty that says, this is ours. So, I've been on that curriculum committee where people fight over every 30 minutes of the curriculum. You know, I'm not giving up my 2 hours on, you know, some, you know, Sjogren's syndrome. No way I'm going to give that up, you know, to you guys, because you're not rheumatology. So it's very hard actually to find the slot where you slot it into the curriculum. At the University of Miami, I used to give noontime lectures to the medical students that they asked for. I wasn't on the curriculum. I was the leading clinical research center in the country, and I wasn't in my medical school's curriculum. When I left the University of Miami and went up the street a few miles to Nova, in my contract I wrote that they had to put it in the curriculum. But that was not a fight there, because there was a different teaching approach. I went to an osteopathic medical school, which is different in Canada. You guys don't have the same deal, but osteopathic medical schools in the United States are four-year medical schools, just like MD medical schools, and then they do the same residencies and so on, so they're the same level of training, and they get this extra layer of something, osteopathic principles. The osteopathic principles is so right on for this, because they understand the whole body matters, and it's not parsed out into systems. So it was not a hard sell to do NECFS curricula at that school, because they were already teaching that way. It's pretty cool. I found my space. I found my sisters.
Go ahead, sorry.
So if you had a chance to read the book, The Emperor of All Maladies, which is a history of cancer research, if you look back 100 years, probably they were looking at cancer the way you're looking now at NECFS. And a lot of the advances came as a result of off-label uses of medications. Now we see a big wave of use of immunotherapy for cancer care. Has there been any trials or off-label uses of immunotherapy for patients?
Yes, short answer is yes. And actually, when you were saying earlier about what we should do to move things, I struggle with this, because in our research, we use what we call repurposed drugs a lot, meaning drugs that are off-label drugs, because we can use them, they're safe, they usually get an FDA exclusion, we can move the science so much faster. But there's no way we're going to get a pharma investment for that, because the profit that will come from that is either very time limited or just doesn't exist at all. So it's a big struggle whether or not to use what's called a pipeline drug, a new drug about to come out, because it'll have an 18-year patent and they'll make a ton of money. So of course they're going to put, the kind of investment into that for a market this size. Or do you worry so much about your patients as I do that I want something right now as quick as I can? And so I make this great big decision to go with repurposed drugs. So we're a repurposed drugs research group because we made, as a group, this big decision to try to deliver faster. But that doesn't mean that we're going to get that fleet of pharma reps that would change the world. So maybe there's a good reason to go pipeline. I'm not sure if we should mix up our strategy a little bit. But anyway, in terms of repurposed, yeah, biologics, you mean talking about immunomodulators? I'm an immunologist, so you're singing my song. But yeah, they're really important and they need to be studied. There's one failed trial with an IL-1 receptor antagonist called Kineret. Otherwise, there's been nothing that's gotten to placebo control state, a bunch of promising open label phase 1s and nothing that went to placebo. Because again, as I say, getting a clinical trial, at least historically, I'm hoping Vicky's changing the landscape, but there was no door to walk through for that. Just none. None of the NIH the special emphasis panel that reviews this is great, but they didn't review it. They only reviewed the program announcement that we're responsive to, which is a mechanisms program announcement. And the clinical trials go to whichever institute you can find a set of clinical trials to, and then you get that same person saying it's not a real disease, it's too toxic a drug, the patients aren't sick enough to warrant any kind of risk, and then only treat symptomatic management kind of trials. So I'm hoping Vicky's changing that mindset, but I've knocked at that door so many times that I've sought my funding elsewhere for trials.
Any more questions? I want to give a big thank you to our panel and our moderator, Cort Johnson, Dr. Nancy Klimas, Dr. Vicky Whittemore, and Scott Simpson.